Hi, my name is Doug Glenn, and thanks for watching this video on classical Christian education in the Pittsburgh area. Here's a quote from Robert Louis Dabney, Chief of Staff to Stonewall Jackson. "The education of children for God is the most important business done on earth. It is the one business for which the earth exists. To it, all politics, all war, all literature, all money-making ought to be subordinated. And every parent especially ought to feel every hour of the day that next to making his own calling and election sure, that is the end for which he is kept alive by God. This is his task on earth." If you're like me, you want your children to have a better education than you had. Well, let me introduce you to classical Christian education and a couple of organizations in the Pittsburgh area that can help. Classical Christian education is not new. It's been around since the medieval times. Children in the United States were classically educated until the ideas of Horace Mann and John Dewey took over in the post-Civil War era. You can tell that children were classically educated by reading letters written by common Civil War soldiers. They wrote so lucidly, so gracefully, so differently, and more beautifully than we write today. Classical Christian education is made up of the 7 liberal arts. These 7 liberal arts are broken down into an initial set of 3, the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and a final set of 4, the quadrivium, geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music. Both the trivium and quadrivium were pathways to prepare students for the study of the queen of sciences, theology. For our purposes, let's focus on the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. What is the trivium? And why does it work so well? The goal of education in the Middle Ages was to bring glory to God by engaging the entire mind. Educators at that time were not interested in crafting a compliant and patriotic citizenry. They were more concerned with seeing that every student received the tools necessary for a lifetime of learning. The first 3 tools were found in the trivium. The first part of the trivium is called the grammar stage. This stage corresponds with what we currently call elementary grades 1 through 4. What is meant by grammar is not what we typically think of when we hear grammar. Every subject has a grammar. Math's grammar, for example, is numbers, operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and units of measure and order of operation, just to mention a few. History also has a grammar: dates, names, places, and events. Science, geography, and languages all have a grammar that need to be learned before more involved, thorough study can take place. Grammar is the foundational building blocks that need to be known in order to understand the more advanced levels of any subject. The grammar stage is characterized by memorization, fun memorization, and much of it. The beauty of the classical approach is that it cuts with the grain of a child's learning abilities. At a young age, children are like sponges that absorb and memorize vast quantities of information, words, sounds, songs, and images. It's during this God-given stage of easy memorization that the classical approach memorizes all the necessary grammar for all the subjects that students will use as they move on into the logic and rhetoric stages. For example, it's during the grammar stage that Latin is introduced. This dead language is a wonderful tool for vocabulary development, clear thinking, and a more thorough understanding of English grammar. Once students pass out of the grammar stage, they enter the logic stage, sometimes called the dialectic stage. This stage roughly parallels our junior high years, grades 5 through 8, where students start questioning their instructors and where they are mentally able to see the relationships between various facts, figures, events, and dates. It's during this inquisitive stage of life that the classical approach again cuts with the grain and uses this inquisitiveness to help the children think logically. The logic stage uses all the facts gained in the grammar stage and helps the children to see the relationships between them, helps them think clearly and accurately about these relationships, and helps them avoid making leaps of logic or other dangerous mistakes of thinking. It's typically during the logic stage that students begin to study formal logic and instructors start to ask more what if and if then type questions. The dialectic method of instruction helps students develop a second tool of learning, clear thinking. Now that the student has gained all the facts in the grammar stage and has learned how to properly order and think about all the facts in the logic or dialectic stage, it's time for them to move on to the third tool of learning, rhetoric. Now, rhetoric is the art of expressing yourself clearly and concisely. The rhetoric stage roughly parallels our modern-day senior high years, where students become oh so concerned about the way they look and whether or not they will be accepted or rejected by their peers. Once again, cutting with the grain, the rhetoric stage takes this natural concern with appearance and puts it to good use by helping the student present themselves and their ideas in a clear and concise manner. It's in this stage that students learn to take the facts and relationships they learn in the grammar and logic stages and express themselves and their thoughts clearly. It's in the rhetoric stage where both verbal and written expression are thoroughly developed. Debate, speech, and essay writing are introduced and developed. Once through the trivium, students are on average well ahead of most students who receive a typical modern-day education. Cutting with the grain of their educational development, the trivium produces intelligent, clear thinking, and persuasive high school graduates. Graduates that have the basic tools of learning and are ready to take on any college or university or life with confidence and grace. While it is possible to separate Christian from classical, the fact is that classical method was developed by Christians for the purpose of bringing glory to Jesus Christ by engaging the whole mind in the praise of God. Today in Pittsburgh, the two homeschooling organizations that are offering explicitly classical education are in fact Christian. More specifically, these two organizations, Blackburn Study Center in the North Hills of Pittsburgh and Gideon Study Center in the South Hills of Pittsburgh, are Reformed in their theology. How does Reformed theology differ from what may be called mainstream or Arminian theology? Well, one of the essential differences between Reformed and Arminian theology comes down to an understanding of just how dead man is in his trespasses and sins, and just how involved he is in his own salvation. Arminians believe that while man is seriously corrupted in his sin, he is still alive enough to see the wisdom and goodness of what Christ did for him and lovingly accept Christ's atoning death on the cross. Reformed Christians, on the other hand, believe that all men are completely dead in their trespasses and sins, and that dead man can't see and lovingly accept the gift of Christ's atoning death on the cross unless God, through His Holy Spirit, first gives him life. Both Gideon Study Center and Blackburn Study Center come from a Reformed Christian heritage and endeavor to hire tutors consistent with that understanding. So classical Christian education is not an experiment in social engineering, and it doesn't use your children as guinea pigs for larger social political ends. It produces independent thinkers with the hope that they will use their God-given minds to give Him praise and build His kingdom on this earth. To find out more about classical Christian education generally, this book by Doug Wilson is a must-read. In the appendix of this book is an essay by Dorothy Sayers, a contemporary and friend of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, entitled The Lost Tools of Learning. Get this book if you want a more thorough-going understanding of classical Christian education. To find out more about classical Christian education options in the Pittsburgh area, contact either Blackburn or Gideon Study Centers at the web addresses below, or send me an email at glenn.doug.h@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and I wish you God's richest blessings as you undertake the most important business on earth, educating your children.